Today on 2-Minute Tips with Patterns by Jen, we talk strip piecing and subcutting those units. When strip piecing, it's important to know your sewing machine. My old machine would get very wavy if I sewed too fast, and so when sewing long stretches, I would have to slow it down to medium. With my Baby Lock Brilliant, I can use the fast speed and it pulls it nice and straight. Now when sewing multiple strips, it's important to know which fabric you have on top. So when we come back to sew on the third strip, we are going to be sewing it in the opposite direction, and I'll show you how I make sure I do that next. When sewing strip sets, I often hear that quilters will get rows that are bowed. And so one of my tips is if you are sewing with just a couple of colors, then make sure that the top fabric is always the same. So if you start with this fabric on top for your first seam, do the same for the second. My other tip is if you're sewing a lot of strips together, throw on a wonder clip or a pin on this seam that you start sewing with. So this would have been here. I would have been sewing this one first and sewing along this way. And so I've marked my fabric with a wonder clip so that I know that this is the end I started with, which means I want to start on the opposite end when I'm sewing my next strip on. Pressing is also a very important step in keeping our strip piecing units from bowing out or giving us that U curve. So what I like to do with my strip pieces is I hit it with a hot iron and I set that seam, and then I finger press. Simply open up your strip, and using your fingers with that hot seam, press that seam the direction you want it to go, and then use the hot iron and seal that seam. This keeps you from pushing the fabric and stretching it with your iron. It will give you that nice straight seam that we have here. Next, we have to subcut our strip units. In order to do this, we want to first give ourselves a straight edge. To do this, I use my ruler and I line up my ruler markings on the seams that I have just sewn. I don't use the outside edges. I just want to use the seams. These we know are sewn straight, and that will give us a good straight edge from this point on. We're going to trim off as little as possible from the end. And now we are ready to rotate the strip and do the subcutting. We've made sure that our seams and our ruler markings are lined up and straight, and that the measurement that we need for our subcut unit is correct, and the marking is on the fabric, not on the mat. And so we will cut this, and then we will continue down the strip, subcutting our units as needed. Thank you for joining me for this episode of 2-Minute Tips with Patterns by Jen.